On the internet, at least on the Finnish language sites, one can find peculiar stories about the ancient kings of Finland. These stories tell that the Nordic rulers, kings and such, have descended straight from these Finnish kings of old. Stories also claim that Finland was independent, well organized, and had powerful armies already during the period of the late Iron Age. Why haven't our school system teach these tales to us in school? Well, because they aren't true. Let's talk about it. Welcome back to Day Talk, on to episode 198. That's right, 198 episodes. If you still haven't, go back after, of course, checking this one out to our catalog and check out our magnificent older episodes. We have done this for 4 seasons already. Today's episode, we're gonna talk about this myth about ancient Finnish kings and how they were allegedly basically the ancestors of the Nordic and Swedish kings. Where did this myth started? Why is it popular on our current time? And why some websites are going nuts about it? We're gonna talk about all of that. But before we jump into the episode, please leave us a like by hitting the thumbs up button. That would help our channel with its visibility. Please do that. And thank you. Now, let's talk about the myth of the ancient Finnish kings. As we already learned, the alleged history of ancient Finnish kings from the Iron Age is hogwash. Still, the most interesting thing about it is where do these stories come from and why were they originally created. These stories have a long history, but more than anyone else, one man can be held responsible for the creation. The man was named Johannes Messenius. Messenius was a Swedish historian from the 17th century. He was professor at Uppsala University and was an official historian of the Swedish Empire. He was a published author who also wrote historical plays. It is evident that this large amount of work did not guarantee an even and high quality, but the many editions of his work that were printed testify to their popularity. As a professor and a teacher at the university, he became very popular by his concerns for his students and by teaching them according to the recent methods. However, his hubris, boasting and waywardness caused difficulties with his colleagues at the university. The students were finally divided into 2 factions, one for him and one against him. The consistory of Uppsala became the battleground for open fights and antics that became so serious that the Chancellor Axel Oxenstierna had to intervene. Messenius and his rival were called to the interrogation in Stockholm in front of the Church Council in July 1613. After an investigation, there was a settlement, but both professors were moved from Uppsala. Messenius was entrusted the keeping of the kingdom's old archives, and he was promoted to assessor of the Swedish Court of Appeal in 1614. Messenius' problems didn't end there. In 1616, he was accused of conspiring with enemies of the state, King of Poland, Sigismund III Vasa, and the Jesuits. He was found guilty as charged, as he couldn't find 12 men who swore that he was innocent. Messenius was sentenced to death in July 1616, but the king changed the sentence to prison, probably for his life. This sentence were to be carried out in the Swedish Empire eastern part, which in these days is known as Finland. More precisely, at Kajaani Castle. During his imprisonment at Kajaani Castle, Messenius began to write his magnum opus, Scondia Illustrata, a 15-part series of books about the history of Sweden. He hoped that this would eventually be his ticket to freedom. As mentioned, the series grew to be 15 parts and it aimed to create a great history for Swedish kingdom. Writer didn't pull any punches, as he claimed that Swedish people can be proven to be descended from the most well-known biblical families. Because Finland was then part of the Swedish Empire, we also needed to have a great history. In part 10 of Scondia Illustrata, Messenius explains how the Finns are descended from Noah's son, Tuiskon. This Tuiskon allegedly established a great kingdom that reached all the way from Old Saxony to Finnish Tornio. According to Messenius, ancient Finland had many great and powerful kingdoms. Kainuu and Karelia had kings of their own. These he picked from Norse Icelandic sagas and unfinished history books from the Middle Ages. Messenius claimed that one time even the Amazons were living in Finland. It might hit you as a surprise, but using Scandinavian legends as historically accurate sources possesses some problems. Good example of Messenius' tales of Finnish kings can be seen in his list of Finnish kings. He names Frontior to be the first king of Finland whose descendants gave name to Denmark and founded Norway. According to Messenius, Frontior lived in the 6th centuries before Christ. This is notable because many current-day internet discussions mentions the late Iron Age as the age of Finnish kings. Writing of Scondia Illustrata might have taken him 20 years, but it finally paid off. After the death of King Gustav Adolphus at the battlefield of Lützen, Messenius was pardoned in 1635. He didn't have long to enjoy his new freedom, for he died already next year. To be fair, Messenius wasn't the only one creating and writing the stories of the great and forgotten history of Finland. Unknown author created few decades after Messenius, in 1670s to be exact, a short chronicle known as Suomen Kronikka, the Chronicle of Finland. The author is listing 15 of ancient Finnish kings. These names have been lifted from the sagas and the text of Saxo Grammaticus, a 12th century Danish historian. Third creator of the great past for Finland is Daniel Jusenius, who praised Finland and its ancient civilization in his dissertation Apoa Vetus et Nova, the Old and New Turku. Juselius' findings were based on his interpretation of Roman historian Cornelius Tacitus' writings. Tacitus wrote that Finns that lived in the far north were miraculously poor and savage people. According to Juselius, being savage in this context actually meant that Finns were especially fierce in combat. Fens, he believed, meant Finns, although medieval sources point that Fens to be Sami people. Juselius said that Finnish people have a noble character, rich natural resources, and a great history. We also had seafaring skills that would shame even the Vikings. What the readers of his dissertation need to understand is that in that time they were using the so-called dialectic method. In this, the author is set to defend his conclusions about the Finland against the fictional opponent who is trying to defame Finland. It is fair to say that this dissertation isn't meeting the requirements of today's scientific demands. Next, let's talk about why the Messenius list of Finnish kings have risen up recently and why this kind of pseudo-history is interesting people these days. One of the reasons for the researchers of the Messenius Scondia Illustrata is that the historians Martti Linna, Jorma Lagerstedt and Erkki Palmén translated the 10th volume of the series in the late 1980s. This was all about the history of Finland. They also translated the Chronicle of Finland that had the list of the ancient Finnish kings in it. Linna himself was convinced that these were based on historical facts, and he was even able to give the lectures about it in Yleisradio in 1988. Yleisradio is Finnish state-owned news agency, and it's working even these days. In his later 21st century publications, Linna distances himself from his previous imaginary interpretations and says that Forntjotr and others were fantasy kings. But the damage had already been done. The translation of his pseudo-history had a great influence on the fact that the tales of forgotten kings and forbidden history began to spread later on the internet. One of the earliest internet posts about the subject was Arto Pöllänen's article published 2001 on Kaltio paper named Olivatko viikinkikuninkaat suomalaisia or Were the Viking Kings Finnish? In the article, Pöllönen is repeating the idea that Finland wasn't an unorganized place populated by barbarians, but a kingdom on the level of other Scandinavian kingdoms. Other often quoted article is Suomen kuninkaat norjalais-islantilaisten saakojen mukaan or Kings of Finland according to Norse-Icelandic sagas by an unknown author. In this, the presented interpretation is the same. According to Middle Age historians, Finland was often mentioned as a kingdom. Only after the 17th century, Finland began to be mentioned as an uncivilized and rural area. The claim was that it was done because of the time's political motivations. Finland's great history needed to be erased. The article was probably being written at the end of the 1990s. After these early internet articles based on Messenius' pseudo-historical Scondia Illustrata, the stories and tales of forgotten greatness of ancient Finland and its kings have run wild on the conversation groups, blogs, and social media. The latest example of this is that the right-wing alternative media, or so-called fake media, have started to spread these stories. These stories of forgotten kings aren't just harmless fantasy, but they have become politically motivated. Significant barrier was crossed when a member of parliament, Ano Turtiainen, published in his Uusi Suomi blog a text of ancient Finnish kings in 2016. In this text he connected it to the themes of popular right-wing populism, immigration, so-called mainstream media, and accusations against the corrupt elite. Turtiainen wrote, "Thanks to the internet that is revealing more and more every day. When lies are rooted so deep in our authorities, governments and media that it penetrates generations after generation, it explains the state of these mentioned people under these current times. When we have been lied for generations, these people don't even know how to be ashamed when caught. Even us, who are being fucked by these liars, don't know any better than stand and complain that we are being fucked." Right-wing alternate media reposted and recycled Turtiainen's blog post. The stories about the ancient kings were spread amongst the other publications in the infamous fake news site MV-lehti, where then the editor-in-chief Ilja Janitskin said that they aren't going to stop until the Finnish people are being taught about their own history. As we know, the science doesn't support this pseudo-history, these tales of ancient Finnish kingdoms or Finnish kings. But still, these stories are spreading, and some people are thinking that Messenius and the Chronicles of Finland got it right. Have you yourself read about these stories, and what do you think about them? Let us know down in the comments. This has been Day Talk. Thanks for joining us, and as always, leave a like by hitting the thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our weekly episodes.